What lies beneath the oracle of Delphi? We know that the oracle of Delphi gave various prophecies in the times of ancient Greece. The oracle of Delphi was the most famous oracle of ancient Greece and of the then known world. Even Alexander the Great went for his oracles from there. It's located in Delphi. It's considered the navel of the world because, according to tradition, when Zeus released two eagles, one to the east and one to the west, they met at Delphi. It was dedicated to the god Apollo. Pythia was the medium with whom the god communicated and gave the oracles which were recorded. Every 4 years, the Pythian Games were held in honor of Apollo, and which Angelos Sikelianos tried to revive. In the same area, a primitive oracle existed from earlier times, in which the goddess Earth was worshipped during the Mycenaean era. Mycene is where Sparta is, as we know, from ancient Greece. Statuettes of the goddess have been found in the ruins of the temple of Athena, Pronia, as well as that of the temple of Apollo. The reason for the establishment of an oracle was the existence of a chasm from which gases came out, thus allowing people to pass into a state of a trance. Over time, more gods were worshipped along with the earth. According to mythology, the guardian of the oracle was the dragon Python, who was killed by Apollo. In the geometric period, the oracle came under the authority of Apollo, as evidenced by the change from clay female figurines to bronze male figurines. In the Iliad, it's mentioned as a rich and holy place. The visitors who sought an oracle from the Pythia were called Theopropes, and according to the ritual of the oracle, they had first to be purified with water from the Castalian spring, paying a certain tax, the so-called pelenon, which was not the same for all, while they had to offer and sacrifice in the temple of Apollo, usually a goat. The animal had to have no blemish, while a necessary omen for the Pythia was to give an oracle was for the animal to begin to tremble after it had first been doused with cold water. Among the theoprophets, there was a hierarchy as to who took precedence in the giving of money. The first people entitled to receive an oracle were the people of Delphi. They were followed by those who had been honored by Delphi with the privilege of presbytery, and then the rest. Within the two last groups, the order was decided by lot. Similar purification rituals were followed by the Pythia. After some formal procedure, she would go down to the so-called adyton, way down that is, where she would listen to the question from the priests who were in an adjacent small space called a house. She would then fall into a trance while priests recorded and interpreted the words that the oracle spoke. The oracle was overcome by 5 men, each of whom belonged to one of the 5 great families of Delphi, called the Deucalionides. They were called the faithful, while their leader was a prophet. Initially, the oracles were given only once a year, on the 7th month of Vicius, Apollo's birthday. With the increase in the attendance of the oracle, they were given in the 7th month, except for the winter ones, as then, according to the myth, Apollo left Delphi and went to the Hyperboreans. And these oracles, whose nature became known to us both from inscriptions and from the works of ancient authors such as Herodotus, constituted a law for the Greek world of the time, making the oracle a kind of arbiter for very important matters such as wars or colonization, giving its so huge power. The laws of Sparta, for example, were introduced by Lycurgus with the authority of the oracle, while the colonies in Lower Italy were founded following the orders from the oracle. In the period of the 7th and 6th century BC, with the increase of interest in new colonies, the oracle of Delphi knows its greatest heyday, as several expeditions were launched after an oracle from the a prophecy from the oracle. These honored Apollo as chief, while several took the name Apollonia. Oracles in earlier times were known for their ambiguous meaning. There were several times when the oracle did not take an impartial stance, but openly took the side of a faction, as for example in the Peloponnesian War, when the oracle took the side of the Lacedaemonians, that is the Spartans. However, the services were given to everyone regardless of the political status that prevailed in their areas. The descriptions of the legend of the Oracle of Delphi concerning the Pythia and her communication with Apollo through vapors belonging to the realm of the unreal and perhaps mythical, in the opinion of some archaeologists. In 1892, French archaeologists began excavations in the area of the sanctuary of Delphi in order to find something to prove that there was indeed a chasm that allowed the gases to emerge and create the communication channel between Pythia and Apollo. But they failed to find anything to prove it, and so the legend remained in the realm of myth. It wasn't until the late 1990s that a team consisting of an archaeologist, a toxicologist, a chemist, and a geologist argued otherwise. According to their theory, the naval rock on which the Pythia sat and uttered her oracles amid the fumes was directly above a chasm created by the slippage of the subterranean plates, leaving a passage for the fumes of gases such as ethane and methane rise to the surface of the soil and be inhaled by the Pythia. The namile, it's known as that if something inhales a small amount of ethylene, they get into a state of euphoria and hallucinatory visions are created. When Pythia was in the state of communication with Apollo and the questions and advice were asked, Pythia's answers were given incoherently. She became delirious and spoke gibberish. The priests of the sanctuary were the ones who translated her gibberish and gave some meaning to what she was supposedly saying. The answers of the oracle were always wise and provident, and that is why the oracle was respected and so famous, and an integral element of the Greek way of life. But what is not widely known is that the late professor of archaeology and rector of the University of Athens, Spiridon Marinatos, in 1958-59, wrote an interesting study entitled Delphic Chasma and the Spirit of Pythia, which was the main topic of his rector's speech in the ceremony hall of the Athens University in the presence of the royal couple Paul and Friederike, having in his hands tangible evidence of the existence of the chasm that was the communication channel between Pythia and the spirit of the god Apollo. Therefore, he preceded his findings by 30 years from the foreign scientists. He states that newer science has ruled out the case of the chasm because it was not discovered by excavations, but according to the ancient testimonies, the gap existed. The first to mention it is Diodorus Sikeliotis. According to him, goats grazing nearby discovered the properties of the chasm because as soon as they approached it, they squealed and made a special sound. Their shepherd, when he approached and stooped out of curiosity into the chasm, was overcome with the same excitement and began to foretell the future. The same happened to others who jumped into the chasm and perished. This is how the oracle became known, and it was thought that it belonged to the earth. Theodorus said that the chasm lay where the shelter of today's sanctuary is. Strabo says the same, adding, however, that from the cave that was not wide mouth, an exciting spirit air was sometimes stronger and sometimes weaker. Pliny adds that anathemiasis, that is, the gas vapors, were among the first similes which created a divine state of inspiration. Of particular importance is the testimony of Plutarch, who was a priest for Delphi for over 20 years. I didn't even know this. In the two of his treatises on the remaining vestiges and on the Pythian, who did not measure the present day, he talks about the Delphic problems. He mentions the chasm and the air rising from it many times, but he never said that the chasm was in the sanctuary of the temple. He also stated that the flatulence was not constant, but sometimes mild and sometimes severe. He also invokes witnesses that the rising spirit is at irregular intervals full of fragrance. He characteristically asserts that this fragrance filled the house where those who were waiting for the oracles were sitting, and that it came from the shelter. The way in which he talks about the rising air leads to the conclusion that it is not the sanctuary of the temple. In particular, he uses the following sentence regarding the fact that the Pythia no longer gives measured oracles. Quote, either of the two must happen, or the Pythia does not approach the place where the sulfur is, or the vapor is completely extinguished and its power dissipated, as two of them, or of the Pythia not wandering in the villages while it is divine, or of the spirit extinguished and the strength left. On the other hand, he confirms the tradition of Diodorus about the discovery of the chasm by the goats, and mentions the name of the shepherd who was Coritas. It also gives us another veiled allusion to the gap using a set design. He represents the heroes of the dialogue coming to the temple to sit on the meridian platform and talk with the sanctuary of the earth in front of him. Then Vithus says that the place of the question is included in the stranger. That is, the place also helps to discuss Pythia's current lack of inspiration. However, there is no talk of fumes, but of muses and yarn, but we already know that with the sanctuary and the original oracle of the earth, the fumes of the chasm are connected. The sanctuary of the earth was discovered during the excavations exactly where Plutarch mentions it, in front of the meridian side of the temple. Keramopolis, the Delphi Guide 1935 mentioned. It's the ancient sanctuary of the earth where the chasm, the rising, breathe. Shortly after the construction of the then new hotel at the edge of the city of Delphi, Marinatus, the archaeologist, heard during his passage there in March 1959 that they were talking about the wind hole, which was particularly cut off by the road alignment. Keramopolis spoke of a crack in the western end of the village. He visited the site, he found the chasm, put his head inside, and immediately felt the breath of the outgoing wind. He photographed the spot and wrote an article in the daily newspaper recommending to the tourist office to see to it that the chasm is no further damaged. In January 1959, he went back to Delphi, but the gap had disappeared. During the new widening of the road, the rock was blown up, and the part of the hole was filled with stones and earth. However, he found a small remaining trace of the chasm with the help of an old photograph, but he still doubted it because the landscape had changed dramatically. As he characteristically writes, the final proof was provided by the gas vapors, anathemiasis. The spirit was always there, coming out through stones and earth. They wear this emanating warmth, and its warmth made more intense by the frosty day. The archaeologist Marinatos believed that the fissure is one and only, which running from east to west passes through the sanctuary and sometimes emits the fumes within it, probably to the sanctuary of earth. Due to the continuous severe earthquakes, the rocks probably underwent a slight movement, from which one mouth was closed and others opened in the wind hole. The water of the Castalia spring moved many times in the past, and in 1870 due to earthquakes. Castalia spring, he also considers it possible that the wind hole was a branch of the Delphic chasm, or even an entirely independent chasm. However, the fact remains that near the sanctuary there is this phenomenon about which antiquity has spoken and covers the various ways in which the spirit is described. Regarding the ancient sources from the chasm, Marinatus, the archaeologist, points out that they are not older than the 1st century BC. Diodorus, who is the oldest, at the same time gave rise to the questioning of the whole issue of chasm and vaporization, because he mentions that they took place in the abode of the sanctuary. Moreover, the frequent expression that the Pythia descended into the shelter led to a series of misunderstandings. Adyton, meaning going down, was considered the part of the temple behind the nave, where in some ancient temples there was a separate compartment which was given the name adyton. The temple of Apollo in that section was excavated internally up to the natural rock, which happens to be discovered solid and absolutely intact. Undoubtedly, there was never a gap there, because the Pythia was descending 2 floors were accepted in the sanctuary of the temple due to traces of steps, but was this really the refuge of the chasm? Keramopoulos already made the correct observation that internally the walls of the temple do not bear a face in the excavated part, therefore it was never intended to be visible. Delphi of the past century. The earliest accounts, which are all poetic, are vague and open to flexible interpretation. The relatively clearer spirit is Pindho. Goldsmith alludes from the hidden temple before, saying there's a darker reason. Gold has a hidden tripod treasure, and in the chorus of Adyton Castalia Spring, it's impossible to conclude which Adyton Euripides means. Also in Evmenides or Jonah, the reader will get the following. In the temple there was a micho, there was a navel, there were thrones around. When Pythia saw the Eumenides sleeping, and all these are found in the space where is also the statue of the god. In Iona, the story about the navel is repeated where Phoebus sits singing hymns, and there the tripos is mentioned around which the elites of Delphi stand inside the temple without any other details. Entrance and exit to the temple are mentioned everywhere and nowhere getting down, not even explicitly the shelter. Therefore, since the shelter of the temple did not show traces of use in the deeper layers, we must think whether the descent, which is witnessed in later sources, means another shelter outside the temple. Diodorus uses the phrase that the chasm was in this place as it was now the sanctuary called adyton. So we notice first of all that holy does not mean only the temple, but also the whole holy exactly in opposition to the temple. Secondly, that if it was a temple, there would be no need to use the phrase the so-called adyton, since adyton was the normal name for the relevant apartment of the temples. When we combine the news that the Pythia came down to this refuge, we are led to the conclusion that it was outside the temple in a deeper place, possibly around the sanctuary of the earth, such shelters within the temples in which they used to exit also exited elsewhere. And in Greece, as in the sanctuary of the Isthmus, where Pausanias describes in the enclosure of Palemon, on the left of the temple, there's also another called adyton, and descends it to underground where Palemon is hidden. The analogy between the adytas of the two sanctuaries is important, since in both descriptions a phrase the so-called adyton is used. In addition to the tradition, Python was buried in the shelter of Delphi, and Palemon was buried on the isthmus. There is also the testimony of Herodotus. It's known that these chasms of the earth, as well as the related underground spaces, were called shelters and mansions. So Herodotus mentions the oracle that the Athenians received about the imminent invasion of the Persian Xerxes. The priests, after performing the relevant ceremonies, entered the palace and went. Pythia Aristoniki then talks about the hopeless disaster which hangs over Athens and ends Alyton 6 Adytos. Therefore, Megaron and Adyton are presented as synonymous, and it was probably one and the same place in the vestibule in which the stranger sat, and in the background was the chasm from where the Pythia gave money. Plutarch's description is in complete agreement with them, with the only difference being that the place where the god-stained sat here is called the house, and is filled with fragrance at random intervals from the spirit of the adjacent Adytos. According to Pausanias, the water of Cassotis arrived inside the Adytos, the drinking of which was one of the elements of divine ecstasy. We do not know what and where Cassiotis was. However, many traces of tanks and pipelines were found, which from the 6th century BC, they led to the water around the temple. The archaeologist Marinatus claims that careful monitoring of these pipelines may facilitate the discovery of the abyss and the chasm. So where did this water come from? They had to drink it and get into an ecstasy. And this I've translated for you from a Greek article. Please leave your comments. Thank you for your support. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.